Welcome to the final chapter of this week. This is where we're going to change the pace up a little bit and do some quick sketches of these forms and try to render them up a bit with some hatching. Alright, now that we've learned to render a box, a sphere, and a cylinder, and we're going to move on and have fun with some of this hatching that we've used for the rest of the gradation sheets. So taking out our pens, we're going to start constructing some forms just like we did in week 3. So from here I'm just building a quick box. Make sure you draw through. And this is a good size to draw in. Nothing too big, nothing too small. We're going to try to fill up about anywhere from 10 to 12 forms on one page. But besides just drawing the forms, we're going to start constructing the shadows little by little. And then we're going to use some hatching, as you see here, based off of our gradation sheet. So on the shadow side, I have a darker pass. So on the shadow side, I'm going to start with a 50 or 60% in terms of hatching, just like we did with the pencils. So I can get a little bit darker, maybe about a 75% going into these shadow areas for the cast shadow. And notice I'm trying to keep the direction all the same. So taking my time, keeping the lines very parallel as I go along. And then on the front plane, so this one's a little bit trickier where I have to make sure my value is lighter by separating the spacing a little bit more. So the top area is reading as light, and I want to punch in my occlusion shadows. And here you have a quick sketch of a box in terms of trying to hatch it up. As you do these, try to change up the proportions and sizing of the forms. So here I have a more rectangular box, a little bit taller, but I'm keeping the construction the same, having a very sort of steep angle on the lighting. So in the previous one, the shadow side, I'll use the downward hatch. This one I'm going to just go left to right. So you can experiment with the direction of your hatching as well to try to take a look at what you can come up with and see what works and what doesn't. Again, this is really going to help us practice drawing through a bit more and just recognizing the values as we go along. Okay, so I got my two boxes. Now I'm going to try a few curved forms, such as a sphere and a cylinder. And here I know I didn't go over the cone, but it's really similar to the cylinder in that it has a coarse shadow on this long side right here. So that's something you want to pay attention to. The main difference is that it will taper because of the triangular shape. So just from what we learned in week 3, make sure you're drawing through the forms. Draw your ellipses all the way. It's good to just draw an arrow to give a direction of the light that you're going for. So from the top of the cone, you're going to draw the angle of the light. You're going to draw the core shadow up from the top and where it touches on the bottom. And that bottom edge will connect to the tip of the cast shadow. So I'm actually drawing the other side as well, drawing through, trying to imagine where trying to estimate where that coarse shadow on the other side will be. And from there you can construct the cast shadow accordingly. I've also drawn the stick in the middle just to make sure that my point is accurate. And from here I'm building up my coarse shadow, so a little bit darker. I got my halftone up across towards the highlight. And in the shadow area, I'm keeping it darker than the halftone, but since it's some reflected light, I'm keeping it a little bit lighter. So with this cylinder, I'm trying to experiment with a cast shadow that's a little bit longer. Maybe the lighting is just a little bit different. So feel free to experiment on the angles of your lighting as well. But I want to do one more render of how to use some like creative texture onto some forms. So we want to make sure that the other textures that you guys created won't go to waste. Constructing my core shadow accordingly with an ellipse and also the cast shadow. So in the core shadow, that's where it's actually going to get the most amount of texture. And I'll elaborate this maybe during a Q&A, why this happens. Usually there's more contrast there because of the way the light interacts with the texture on top of the form. So I'm drawing all these circles across the core shadow, thinking about my spacing based on the gradients I created. And then from there, I'm just going to do a simple hatch on the bottom just to indicate the reflected light area in the shadows. Okay, so from here I've created these 5 quick forms, shaded them accordingly. Try to get a variety of forms, keeping your gradients and swatches in mind, and just have fun applying these, and it'll really test your knowledge about what you learned this week.